quite often in my YouTube recommended feed, I see videos pop up with title like issues with modern game graphics or insert franchise graphics getting worse. What are your thoughts on this phenomenon? Feels like an especially strong feeling this generation that games don't look better than they did last gen, which is wild considering the leap in compute. But I certainly do feel underwhelmed by the performance or visuals of games this generation often as well. The PS5's GPU is far beyond the PS4's, but how often do games look that much better? What do you reckon about this, John? I mean, the phenomenon of this particular type of video is gaining traction, that's for sure.
For sure.
And there is kind of like, what can we say? I think from my perspective, developers are looking to innovate and improve graphics in ways that are quite extraordinary, but beyond the technical leap of the hardware that's been delivered to them. And the result of that is that you get this improvement to visuals, but it does come with a cost, which I think is maybe what's causing this stuff. But I'm curious what you think about this.
Correct. And I think it's a multi-pronged approach. And first, I would say that we are in sort of a state of growth in terms of graphics technology. And this is a state of growth that we've been in many times before, such as when 3D was first introduced to the world. It was very rough early on, but it was a necessary, difficult step to get there. During the PS360 generation, that was also a very difficult time. That was when we saw the rise of modern programmable pixel shaders, vertex shaders, and a lot of other modern techniques, real-time shadow maps everywhere, real-time lighting. But in many ways, it could be argued it looked worse than the generation that came before it. Now I think we're facing a multitude of problems that are all kind of coalescing together to create sort of something that I can see someone perceiving as a step back. First of all, you look back to say, one example that always springs to mind is something like Uncharted 4. Especially, I'm going to point out there's this room at the end during the epilogue to the game that is often highlighted as like, look at this is amazing. And it absolutely is. The reason it looks so amazing is because they have pre-calculated some beautiful lighting, and that combined with, of course, the artistry of the team that worked on the game, right? So this is like you're starting from this point. You have this beautiful area, beautiful room specifically. So what modern technology is trying to do, obviously, is, okay, can we reach this fidelity, but actually generate it in real time? That's where we're moving towards. But why do you want to do it in real time? Well, of one, that makes the actual lighting a lot more flexible in terms of what you can do with it. If it's just a single room like that, that's fine. Maybe you don't need it, but in a lot of cases, it can be very beneficial to gameplay because it allows for a more dynamic scene, especially once you start to tie in actual moving objects, physics-based objects, other enemies. Those things do not integrate naturally within those scenes. So that famous scene at the end of Uncharted, there's really nothing in there except for your character model walking around. And so as a result, they don't have to worry about that, which of course that opens another can of worms in terms of scoping your project based on what you're trying to do artistically. Right. And all throughout history, there have been games that have attempted to push technology in one way or the other, and maybe they don't get the balance right. And they create something using technology that maybe they didn't need in the first place. Right. That's a whole separate other thing. That's a problem. So part of the problem, though, with that sort of target, moving those things to real time is great. It also facilitates easier development for things like lighting artists and building these environments. But, of course, with ray tracing and all that, it has a computational cost, which we're seeing. And this has never not been a problem on consoles, and it's still a problem on consoles, in that in order to achieve this, you have to make sacrifices. In the past, that would be things like frame rate and just like raw, resolution and such. But obviously there has been a resurgence there has been an upswell in this use of reconstruction, temporal anti-aliasing, things designed to sort of minimize pixel popping and improve the overall stability of an image. But in this pursuit of performance using these demanding techniques, I would say a lot of developers do go a little bit too hard on it. And one perspective so this means image quality then suffers, right? That is the big thing. This image instability. People are picking up on it, and they're not wrong. The rise of these techniques, things like denoising not being great in Unreal Engine 5, especially with like their default denoiser. You have the temporal anti-aliasing issues, you have the upsampling issues. All of these things by themselves can be solved with more input data, but because they're being pushed to this limit, everything kind of gets noisy, right? And this also varies depending on the type of screen you're using. Like on PC, I've had arguments over DLSS before where they're like, oh, I don't like it. It's smeary. It's noisy. And I'm talking from the perspective of being lucky enough to use a native 4K screen. They're using a 1080p screen. That matters a lot in terms of what the base input resolution is going to be. And it really does impact image quality. So there's that. The other point I would say about visuals as a whole is that this takes people to make. This stuff is generated by real humans. We've reached a point where fidelity is so high in games, and has been for so long, that just creating these assets is extremely expensive and time consuming. And not all artists are the same in terms of their skill set as well. So I saw somebody complaining that something like Avowed didn't look as good as Uncharted 4 or Red Dead Redemption 2. And they were really incensed about that. Like, how can this be a downgrade? This is a new generation. But that bumps up against this whole issue with manpower and like what people can realistically achieve and budgets and all these other things. So it's not even the technology anymore that's impacting the visual presentation, right? You can't look at one of the most revered development studios in the world with infinite resources like Rockstar. They were able to pour everything they had into making Red Dead Redemption 2. Most studios could never dream of having that talent of people, that pool of talent, that sort of budget, that amount of time to make these games. And that's what was necessary to get there. So, something like Avowed has to leverage new technologies like, Lumen, Nanite, and what that, to sort of push its graphics game up a bit while still having constraints in other areas. So I think it's just a whole mix of these all issues coalescing together. And the fact that diminishing returns is, I would say, kind of real to a point. And that also ties in again back to the whole real-time versus baked kind of stuff that we've been able to achieve great looking visuals for so long. So, and then lastly, everybody has a different eye for things. Like what my eye focuses on, what you see in a scene and what you appreciate can be totally different to what somebody else sees. Like the things that annoy us might not annoy another person, right? Like you have little frame inconsistencies, like little frame time spikes. There's a lot of people that do not care. They don't notice it. That's where the whole runs fine on my PC thing comes from, right? But they might really, really dislike the way smearing looks from temporal anti-aliasing and reconstruction, especially when used on a lower res monitor. And that's all they can see when they look at that screen. The rest of it doesn't matter. They see that smearing. That's what they're laser focused on. They don't like it. And they're not wrong either. Like that's absolutely their prerogative to do it. So I think all of this stuff together has created this whole situation where, yeah, there's a subset of people that think games can look worse or haven't really evolved, even though technically they have. And I think it's just going to continue to get quote unquote worse given how all of this works together. I don't know. Was that coherent enough?
I think it's such a holistic issue, and you gave a whole bunch of different points about it as to why it is the way it is. And I think that covers almost every single basis. I would only add two things. You covered everything that I would have said. I would have added only that since it was about YouTube videos, that there's an angle to this about making profit online, and being really negative and drama stirring is a huge profit angle. The grift is real. And so people want to make money. And so you'll see a lot of negative videos, even about topics that you would be surprised that there's a negative video about it. It's just a really good way to get people to talk and look at your video. But the second thing I would add to is just game stylization has changed over time. Like the type of games, we talked about this back when there was this uproar about Far Cry 5 looking worse than Far Cry 2 or whatever. And, games went from being very dynamic, real-time lighting, simulation heavy to being, as in what was the AAA trend, to being very much so about like focused narrative experiences that were more akin to Hollywood movies in a lot of ways, and like linear corridors. And there's this tension, because if you want to have ultra baked lighting like an Uncharted 4's end scene there, well, then the entire scene can't be moving, right? So, but what if a dev wants things to be moving because it's more their prerogative for their game design? Well, then they have to lean into other technologies and visuals that make that possible. And as a result of this tension, sometimes when people think things look worse, they're actually talking about entirely different game designs. And I don't think those comparisons should be made apple to apple. They're apple to orange at that point. And it's always good to have context in mind as to what type of game we're talking about before we start comparing, I don't know, Red Dead Redemption 2 versus something else, right? Yep. And that was a really great point of yours about budget and Avowed. It was
also,
really
Alex, I would say on top of that, people are asking for more interactivity in games, more simulation. We certainly are. This is key to getting there, right? It went away for a reason, and it's because of this rise of all this advanced baked lighting, physically based materials, everybody trying to make these things look super realistic and good, and they got there. But I think something like The Order 1886 was one of the first to really do it. It's a perfect example of those limitations. It looks insanely good even today, but it is like extremely static. Everything is locked in, and game design actually followed this trend by and large for many, many years. And we've not gotten back to the simulation heavy stuff that we'd like to see, but all this real-time rendering, this is key to getting there. Without it, you're stuck.
Okay. I don't think I have too much to add to that at all. But yes, as you say, Alex, the grift is real. There's sort of basically looking at sort of issues that people have and then blowing them up into quote unquote content. I think it's quite remarkable.
I don't love that, but like at the same time, it's so difficult to make money on YouTube, and I don't begrudge people for trying to find ways to make money, even if it's sometimes I don't agree with it. It's hard out there.